First of all, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Dominic. I'm a software developer working on websites, automations, and testing tools. I may not be famous or work in the games industry professionally. I want to voice my opinion on the issue because it matters to me as a gamer. And yes, I know this is a little late. And again, these are my opinions. You can either agree or disagree. Let's have a healthy debate. Before we begin, I'd like to make sure that something is. While I may disagree with others on this topic, I do not condone any form of bullying, harassment, doxing, or anything else that could harm someone physically, mentally, or emotionally. Debate is healthy, harassment is not. Now, what is Stop Killing? Stop Killing Games is a consumer focused initiative calling on game developers and publishers to stop removing access to games people have already bought, especially when those games are perfectly playable but they get taken down due to licensing, server shutdowns, or policy decisions. The movement doesn't demand that all games live forever. It simply asks that when a game reaches its end of life, developers provide a way or any kind of way for people to continue accessing it. They bought it, so they should be able to use it as long as it continues to perform the way that is satisfactory to that person. Like if I buy a computer, I I'd expect to be able to use that until it breaks. Well, that could be true on offline mode, private server option, or even just a final stripped down build of like the very basic form of that game. At its core, Stop Killing Games is about preserving access to what we purchase and treating games as something more than a short term live service. It's about respecting players and the customers and creating a healthier, more sustainable relationship between developers and the people who support them. Now, let's address the issue. First, legal and contractual. Some games include licensed content. Yes, no one disputes that. Things like the music, voice work, or even third party software or middlewares like Havoc or Fmod, which I'm pretty sure if you played any recent video game, or not even recent, any video game within the decade, you've seen their uh, logos in the splash screens of the game before you can actually go to the menu of the game. Now, once those licenses expired, the game cannot go on because it would violate the license agreement. In my opinion, that's a manageable issue. Developers can use what's called build flags or conditional packaging to exclude licensed contents easily, and that would not take a lot of work. It would, at the very best, or even at the very worst, a few lines of code. You can prepare a clean fallback version of the game that omits expired licenses while keeping the core experience intact. For third party systems like Havoc, it's entirely possible to fall back on open source or native physics systems. In fact, modern game engines already ship with these by default, like Unreal Engine and Unity have their own physics engine. With proper planning, fallback systems can be built as part of the game's foundational architecture, something reusable across multiple titles. Like if I am developing a game and I want it to have longevity way past when my Havoc license expire, I can plan that ahead and make a system to fall back onto before actually releasing the game or even before creating the game itself. Now, that is uh, undisputably extra work. That being said, that extra work will only have to be done once. Once you release a game with that extra work, you can create more and more games that use the same code, the same fallback systems without having to do the extra work. If consumers begin demanding longer lasting games, studios will naturally shift toward using more sustainable third party softwares or licenses. If Avoc or other similar softwares or third party middlewares doesn't adapt to the market, another system will definitely take its place and make a better product than them. That's just how markets work in real life. The other issue is technical impracticality. The argument is that online only games rely on complex server side systems, making them work offline or enabling private servers could require massive rewrites or be outright impossible. Now, I agree to this to an extent. For MMOs, for example, they are server side heavy, or the logic on the server side is heavy. And yes, that is hard. To give you an experience, um, I in my youth I started private servers for a game called Ragnarok Online, and I played around with the server software called our Athena. That backend handled everything, while the client showed your character moving from point A to point B. The actual position updates were done entirely on the server side. If you modified an item's damage in the server side, even without touching the client's code, the effect would be immediate. In systems like that, you can't just flip a switch and make the game offline. You need to replicate the core server logic in the client or release a server software entirely. There's also the argument that releasing that server side software to produce a um, a private server could pose risk if it's shared across live games. Like for example, I am a publisher or a studio and I have 5 MMOs that use the same software to handle the server side logic of all those games. Now, each of those software will be running on its own, possibly on its own server or multiple servers per game. If I release that server side software because I discontinued one of my games, someone could reverse engineer that software to gain access to possibly exploit vulnerabilities to the other 4 games that I'm still running that software on or still using to support other games. And I understand that. But this doesn't apply to all games. Not all games are MMOs, not all games are server side heavy. Single player games or games with minimal server side logic or games that just have offline access or offline play, like MOBAs that allow players to play with bots or create lobbies with the local network. Those can still be run because the game itself knows the logic that needs to happen when the game runs. Uh, Now let's talk about security and abuse. Releasing server code or tools for private servers could open the door for abuse. Cheating, vulnerabilities, damage to the studio's brand. I don't know enough to fully judge this on a technical security level, but I'd argue that if the server is no longer in use, if the server software is no longer in use, and the game has been officially abandoned, the risk is minimal. At that point, the community should be free to preserve or host the game independently. Who are they going to cheat against themselves? And while there's always risk of bad actors, scammers, fraudsters, etc., the average gamer today very good at spotting fake communities and shady servers. The internet has taught us well. I think the gaming community is one of the communities that are most equipped to deal with those. The next issue that people point out is developer burden. Now, the argument is that the demands could place an undue burden on developers, especially on indie studios, which would require extra time and money to build fallback modes or sunset plans. Now, this is a valid concern, and this is true especially for live service games, especially MMOs. But there are games like single player games, even ones that for some reason have an always online requirement but doesn't really give you any sort of interaction with other people online. This shouldn't be an issue because, again, the game has the logic. The software you are running on your local machine, your local computer, have all the logic to run the game. This isn't about burden, it's about consumer fairness. Devs could simply provide the final version of the game with a warning that, hey, certain features may no longer work after the due date of the license or a certain date for a server shutdown. That's it. No one expects every little feature to survive. What we want is access to what we paid for, especially when it's fully playable offline. I do have additional opinions about time and cost in game development. I'll save that for later. A little anecdote, back in maybe early 2000s, I was working on a cyber cafe. And one of the new employees we had on the cyber cafe was a fan of the old video game Battle Realms. Now, Battle Realms was an old game even by then. But I played Battle Realms when I was in third grade, and by that time, the computers that have ran Battle Realms previously were obsolete, very obsolete. So we tried to play Battle Realms to like have some fun times with our new colleague, and some features didn't work. The map didn't show, if I remember correctly, and the graphics was just um, it's not totally unplayable, but a lot of the features that would allow you to be a decent player of Battle Realms aren't there. Not because the game's broken, it's because the hardware evolved that to the point where the game can no longer support it. And there are older games that rely on CPU clocks um to time their iterations. If you play those games on newer machines, they would be unplayable. But they're still accessible. They just have features that are no longer working. I think that's fine. It's mostly for cultural or artistic preservation. And again, you paid for the game. Sure, it's broken, but you can still use it. And no one blames the studio for if the game happens to do that. Like it breaks because hardware just evolved so good. The last issue I want to tackle is idealism versus reality. Now, the argument is that stop killing games is idealistic. Some games will die, always online games, especially, were never designed to last forever. And yes, there is idealism, but it's rooted in valid concern. And I think nobody's demanding that at all. I think the community that started this initiative and the people that support it are still willing to compromise. Yes, they understand that there are games that might be impossible to preserve at this point, but those that can be preserved should be preserved. Sorry. Nobody's demanding that all games live forever, but we're asking that games not needlessly be destroyed when there are simple and reasonable ways to keep them alive. This is about pushing the industry to embrace better norms, ones that respect players and customers, treat games not as disposable live products, but as cultural works worth preserving. Now, a little bonus I said earlier that I have some thoughts about the time and cost of game development. And this part is heavily opinionated. I didn't work in the game industry again. So take this with a heavy grain of salt. Video games today have grown significantly in every aspect: file size, world scale, narrative depth, graphical fidelity. Every aspect of a video game today is significantly bigger and better from the video games when I was young. And yes, that growth comes with increased cost of development, which justifies some financial expectations from publishers and studios. And I think they deserve that incentive. But here's the thing: with recent developments, especially now, with Epic Games and Unreal Engine now dominating the engine space, that they basically have a monopoly. Many developers no longer have to build or maintain proprietary engines. Like, sure, they still might want to build um, plugins or add-ons for Unreal Engine and or other commercial engines available out there, but they don't have to innovate on the engine itself. They don't have to maintain the software. And they just have to report the bugs. If there are bugs in Unreal Engine itself, they just have to report it. And if you have an enterprise license with Unreal Engine, I'm pretty sure that bug will get fixed pretty quickly compared to when you report it if you just have a free license. Instead, they can focus on what really matters, making the game. And this shift should, in theory, free up time and resources. And if teams adopt efficient shared tools like Unreal Engine, we may eventually see a flattening of cost or even a reduction. At the very least, it creates a room to plan for longevity, not flashy short-term launches or um, some closing thoughts. If you made it this far, thank you. I know I'm not the best speaker. I'm not the best video maker. I'm not the best content creator. I hope this helped you see things from a different angle. I do love games and I want them to last, not just for me, but for everyone who bought a video game in their life. And also, I want to throw out some of the technical things that I know personally as a developer. If you are a developer or a gamer who feels the same, consider supporting the initiative. TopGunGames.com. It's there. They're still looking for a few signatures, although they already reached their original goal. If you work in the game industry, give us your thoughts on the matter so we better understand your concerns, and let's find a middle ground that we can compromise on. And again, let's keep it civil, folks.